The phone rang at 9:07 a.m. I remember the exact minute because my coffee cup was halfway to my mouth, and I never got to drink it. It hung there in the air, suspended by the weight of a voicemail blinking on my screen from Taylor Fitz Law Offices. The silence in my apartment suddenly felt like it had a temperature, cold, loaded. I played the message twice. Formal, distant, like I was being summoned, not invited. You are requested to attend the reading of Silas McConnell's final will and testament at 9:30 a.m. sharp. Requested. That word did more damage than it should have. I hadn't spoken to my sister in 3 years. Dad and I, even longer. Our last conversation was a grunt over the mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving. And now this? A reading? Something didn't sit right. My gut twisted. This wasn't just legal housekeeping. This felt planned. You know how in movies they say nothing good ever starts with a lawyer's voicemail? They're right. The law office smelled like money and mourning. Mahogany walls, brass lamps, and that faint, sterile scent of lemon oil trying to hide something older. Maybe secrets, maybe rot. They were all already there. My brother looking like a senator in a navy suit. My sister, Caroline, draped in muted silk like she'd walked out of a lifestyle magazine's grief edition. She glanced up when I entered, didn't speak, just smirked, subtle, controlled, like she knew something I didn't. No one else looked at me. First time we'd all been in a room since Mom's funeral. It was like we were waiting for the ghost of Dad to float in with a whiskey in hand. The last time he touched me, his hand had been papery, cold, but it lingered, gripped mine with something like intention. I'd wondered for years what that meant. The lawyer entered. Gray suit, gray beard, gray tone. He cleared his throat like he was about to read a eulogy. Instead, he opened a folder and started a war. I, Silas McConnell, being of sound mind and body. That's how it always starts, right? And for a few seconds, it sounded like the beginning of closure. But then he kept going. My sister's name, $76 million, the house in Buckhead, a BMW 7 Series like this was the Price is Right. My brother, shares in the family company, 2 vacation properties, and a cabin in Blue Ridge he'd once said smelled like mildew and loneliness. Me? 1 envelope, to be delivered privately. That was it. I didn't cry, didn't blink. But inside, it was as if the floor opened up beneath me. Caroline didn't hide her smile. Her chin tilted up like she'd been waiting for this moment since we were kids. She won, and I wasn't even a contender. I thought of Dad's words, once when I was 16 and broke curfew for the 3rd time. You don't need things, he'd said. You have fire in your gut. But I remember wondering if he ever really saw it. Or if he just said that to excuse not giving me what he gave the others. Money doesn't change people, it unmasks them. The lawyer walked around the table, a sealed manila envelope in his hand. He stopped beside me, didn't look me in the eye. Your father asked this be delivered directly to you, he said. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Wax sealed, the red kind, with Dad's signet pressed right into it, something he only used for legal documents and love letters. My fingers hesitated. Caroline's eyes were on me. My brother's jaw tensed. The room was electric. I didn't open it, not there. I stood up, quietly. No drama. But as I turned toward the door, I whispered, more to myself than to them. They think this is the end. But he knew something. The car was warm from the Georgia sun. I slipped in, placed the envelope on the passenger seat like it was a living thing. I didn't start the engine, just stared at it. My whole life, I'd been the other daughter, the one who got thanked for showing up but never asked to stay. But this wasn't nothing. There was something in that envelope. I could feel it in my bones. Not money, not apology, power. I glanced into the rearview mirror, and for a second, just a second, it was like the night Mom died. That mirror always showed me more than I wanted to see. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun had started its slow descent behind the brick buildings outside my window. I slipped off my shoes, locked the door, and stood there for a moment, staring at the envelope still sitting untouched on my small kitchen table. I didn't feel afraid of what was inside. It wasn't fear, it was something closer to respect, like holding a letter from the dead, a sealed goodbye that might just shake everything loose. I filled the kettle, pulled out the same box of cheap mint tea I used to make for Dad when he stayed over years ago, back when we still had something. The sound of the boiling water felt louder than it should have, echoing in the stillness. I sat down, envelope in front of me, hands wrapped around my mug like it might steady me. His handwriting was sharp, clear, not a single wobble in the stroke, strong and final. Sometimes closure doesn't come in silence, it comes in ink. The seal gave a slight crack when I broke it, like something old was finally breathing again. Inside was a single page, folded neatly in thirds. It smelled faintly like cedar. Dad always kept his things in those old wooden boxes. The first line didn't start with "I'm sorry." That would have felt fake coming from him. It started with, "If you're reading this, I've already failed to say it in person. So here it is. I trusted you." He didn't talk about money, not the house, not the company. He wrote like a man who knew the clock ran out too fast and wanted to leave a breadcrumb trail. You were never the loudest, never the one who needed eyes on you to move forward. That's why this lands with you. He mentioned a deposit box, said the name of a bank I hadn't thought about in years. Then, if they've opened their mouths by now, they've likely made a mess. Do what you've always done. Quietly. Right. Behind the page, taped with yellowed Scotch tape, was a small bronze key. I held it up to the light. Cold, simple, with a slight bend in the neck. Not a house key, not a drawer key. This was a key to something people didn't want found. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel overlooked. I felt chosen. A strong woman looks a challenge in the eye and gives it a wink. I didn't sleep much that night. My thoughts kept tripping over themselves. Caroline's smirk at the will reading. My brother shifting in his seat when my name was called last. That whole thing was too staged. Sometime after 1 a.m., I pulled up my bank app. The joint account Dad and I used for small transfers, clothes, groceries when things got tight, the kind of things parents don't broadcast, was gone. Closed. 3 days before he died. 3 days. That account was only ever accessed by us. Nobody even knew it existed except me and him. I stared at the date, then remembered an argument between Caroline and Dad last Thanksgiving. Something about optics and controlling perception. Don't trust titles, trust patterns. He'd whispered that to me once when we were fixing a jammed window in the cabin. Back then, I thought he meant business. Now I wasn't so sure. I searched the bank he mentioned. One branch left in town, not the one near our old neighborhood. This one was downtown, bigger, tucked behind a sushi place. Every piece felt too convenient, like they all knew I wouldn't get much, and they needed it to stay that way. I wanted to believe they just misunderstood him, that they were grieving in their own cold, designer-draped way. But something deeper told me the truth had teeth, and it was already biting. The next morning, I got up before the sun, threw on a black sweater, and drove downtown. I didn't tell anyone. No text, no call. Just me, the letter, and the key. The bank lobby was marble and glass, cold and trying too hard to look warm. A woman with a smile too polished asked if she could help. I slid the envelope forward. She read, paused, and her expression dimmed just a touch. "I'll be right back," she said. 10 minutes passed. A security guard repositioned himself near the back hallway. Subtle, trained. When she returned, she motioned for me to follow her. We walked through a maze of hallways to a small room. No windows. A table, 2 chairs. She placed a small metal box in front of me. My fingers hesitated just long enough to feel the nerves. Then I unlocked it. Inside, a USB drive, a small stack of family photos, and a thick red-sealed document. Legal. Heavy. I didn't read it there. I didn't ask questions. I closed the box, nodded, and walked out with my hands just slightly trembling. This wasn't just inheritance. This was a setup, a buried map. Back home, I locked the door, dropped my keys in the same chipped dish they always went in, and went straight for my laptop. I plugged in the USB. The screen blinked. Password protected. Only one file appeared. Trust no one. Final MP4. My chest tightened. He named it like he knew. Whatever was on that file wasn't about family. It was about survival. I may have been given less, but I've been given the truth. Truth doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it breaks the damn door down. The USB drive sat on the counter, same place I'd left it since last night, unmoved, but in my head, it never stopped flashing. That file name kept whispering to me like a dare I wasn't ready to accept just yet. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, stared out the kitchen window. The city lights were smeared behind foggy glass, like they couldn't make up their minds whether to shine or hide. I pulled out my journal. I've had one since I was 16. Dad used to call it my backup brain. Tonight, the pen felt heavier than usual. I didn't write much. Just a date. A feeling. And a quote someone told me once that wouldn't leave me alone. You don't move past trauma. You walk with it until it stops trying to trip you. My eyes wandered to the fridge. A photo was pinned there, me and Dad at that old used bookstore. I was maybe 12, hair wild, holding up a battered Hemingway like I'd discovered treasure. Dad had one hand on my shoulder. He looked proud. That photo cracked something. Memory didn't just come back, it kicked the door in. It was 6 months before he died. I remember because the leaves were still turning when I showed up at his house, unannounced. Something about that place always made me feel like I didn't need permission. The living room was dim, only one lamp on, but I never made it that far. From the hallway, I heard them. Merelda's voice was sharp, slicing through the quiet. I deserve everything. I earned it. You think you can just split things like this family's some democracy? Dad didn't yell. That wasn't his style. But there was a tension in his voice, like a rope pulled too tight. Entitlement isn't the same as love, Merelda. You're not owed just because you want it louder. There was a pause, a beat, then more words I'll never forget. If you keep threatening to drag your mother's name through court, I'll cut you out of it all. Every damn penny. She stormed past me seconds later, didn't even glance. Her heels clicking down the hallway like gunshots. I stepped into the room. Dad was facing the window, didn't notice me at first. When he turned, I saw the exhaustion behind his eyes, like he was tired of loving people who only loved themselves. She won't listen to me, he said quietly. Maybe someday she'll fear you instead. I didn't answer. I should have. But what do you say when your father confesses defeat? Now that moment plays on a loop in my head. Could I have said something different? Done more? Would it have mattered? I picked up his letter again, reread the part that said, "You've always been my anchor." It hit differently this time. Not as a compliment, as a responsibility. Caroline always wanted to be adored. Merelda wanted to be obeyed. But me? I just wanted peace. And maybe that's why Dad put the weight in my hands instead of theirs. Because he knew they'd use it to burn bridges. I might actually try to build something with it. Looking back at that fight, I realized something I'd missed the first time. Merelda wasn't angry. She was terrified. Not of losing Dad, but of losing control. Some people don't want peace. They want to win, even if it costs blood. I opened my laptop, pulled up the court records. Dad had changed his power of attorney a week after that fight. From Merelda to no one. Just revoked it. I didn't even know until now. There were patterns all over the place. Legal documents shifted, names removed, wills revised, quiet moves made, while loud arguments distracted everyone else. And it wasn't just emotional manipulation, it was systemic. She didn't just hurt people, she restructured things behind their backs. I texted Ray, Dad's old friend, a retired estate attorney. "Can you talk? Need advice?" Quietly. He responded almost instantly. "Of course. Come by tomorrow." I looked around the room. I was the only one left seeing this from both sides. The lies, the fear, the desperation behind every handshake. And suddenly, that USB wasn't just a file. It was a fuse. I sat down, turned off the lights. Only the laptop screen lit the room now. The cursor hovered over the file. Trust no one. Final MP4. I whispered, Show me what I already know but couldn't prove. Then I clicked. Sunlight split through the blinds like someone took a blade to my sleep. I hadn't moved from the couch all night. The USB drive sat exactly where I'd left it, on the edge of the desk, like it was waiting for permission. I still hadn't opened the file. But this morning, my hands were itching. Not for drama, for answers. I boiled water, poured cheap coffee into an old chipped mug, and pulled out everything. Dad's letter, the manila envelope, the key, the documents. I spread them on the dining table like crime scene evidence. The letter stared back at me. His handwriting, deliberate, firm, as if each word was carved with intent. And there it was again, that phrase. Power of attorney. I grabbed my phone and called Ray, Dad's old lawyer friend. Can you meet today? Bring everything, he said. Let's look at it. I didn't even eat, just packed it all and left. Ray's office still smelled like old paper and floor wax. Books lined the walls, actual law books, not just decor. He listened while I talked, then unfolded each document like he was defusing a bomb. I handed him Dad's letter last. He squinted. Your father trusted you, that's clear. Now let's see who didn't. He paused when he reached a certain page, his brow furrowed. This signature, he said. This one's off. I leaned closer. See the angle of the S in Silas. Compare it to this other one. He pointed at an older, notarized page. Your sister's attorneys didn't challenge this because they probably hoped no one would. He broke it down for me in layman's terms. Power of attorney gives someone the legal ability to act in your father's name, access his accounts, move property, make decisions if he's incapacitated. So if it's forged, it's fraud, felony level. My stomach dropped. My hands clenched so tight, I almost ripped the edge of the tablecloth. Ray tapped his pen twice. This is why your father removed all POAs before he passed. He knew someone was abusing it. He just didn't say who. But now, we did. Ray asked for permission to access Dad's bank history using the estate files I brought. A few minutes later, he showed me something that made the room tilt. Here, he said. 3 months before your dad passed, the POA was legally rescinded. All accounts flagged for manual verification. He turned the monitor toward me. But this, he tapped another record. This transfer happened 2 weeks before that. Someone used the old POA form illegally. I blinked. The signature didn't match. The date didn't make sense. But the recipient? Merelda. There was even an internal memo. All corporate documents to be routed through Delroy. Delroy, her lawyer, or fixer, or both. Piece by piece, it all lined up. It wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. I thought of that envelope again. Why Dad didn't leave me money, but left me this. Not a gift. A directive. So, I whispered, he didn't forget me. He prepared me. I stepped outside the building, photocopies in hand, lungs tight. The truth should feel like oxygen. But right now, it felt like smoke. Should I confront Merelda? Should I go public? Ray warned me. If you accuse her outright and it's not handled legally, you're opening yourself to defamation, slander, a whole mess, even if you're right. But if I stay silent, that's a choice too. I looked out at the cars passing by, people walking their dogs, sipping lattes, arguing on sidewalks. The world kept turning, but mine had stopped. Dad once told me, character matters when no one's watching. I remembered that now, felt it, burning under my skin. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about not letting the worst version of her win. So no, I wouldn't stay quiet, even if it cost me everything. Driving home, I passed her house. Big, white-trimmed, perfectly landscaped. Even her bushes looked smug. I pulled over. Just stared. Then I grabbed my phone and texted Jubal. I found something, not ready to move, but I'm done being erased. When I got home, I placed everything on the desk again, and finally, I clicked the folder on the USB. It opened to a document, Merelda's Assets, Final.docx. I stared at the title. My jaw locked. My chest didn't rise. She thought she could bury this, but I've got a shovel too. I didn't drive slow. I didn't hesitate at the gate. I didn't even bother texting first. Merelda's house wasn't a home. It was a display, the kind of place that screamed, "I won," with every inch of polished glass and curated coldness. I rang the bell. Her housekeeper, startled to see me, said nothing and stepped aside. She knew better than to ask questions. Merelda came down the stairs like she was on a runway, hair perfect, face tight, wrapped in silk that probably cost more than my rent. She didn't say hello. I held out the red-sealed copy. "Thought you'd want the courtesy of a heads up." Her smirk didn't twitch, but her eyes blinked twice, just to beat off. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "when you think someone's being quiet, they're just calculating." She took the envelope with fingers too stiff to be casual, and just like that, the mask began to slip. Merelda turned on charm like flipping a switch. "This again?" she said, smiling like we were sharing an inside joke. "You really have a thing for drama. I have a thing for truth. Oh, spare me. You always wanted the spotlight. Even at Dad's funeral, you looked like you were auditioning for grief." I didn't answer. I laid out what I brought. Copies, dates, trails, bank withdrawals, email chains, the POA form with the signature that didn't match. Her voice wavered when I mentioned Delroy. She knew. She just didn't think I'd know. "You think you're clever?" she hissed. "Dad was out of it the last year. He didn't even remember your birthday. Yet he left me the USB, the letters, the key. Because you were pathetic," she snapped. "You needed crumbs. You were always the charity case. Don't mistake that for trust." I stayed still. "You're not his legacy. You're his pity project." I stood. "You done?" She crossed her arms. I stepped closer, voice steady. "Then why are you shaking?" For a second, she blinked too much. Her hand twitched. I turned and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. My heart didn't slow down until I hit the highway. It wasn't victory. It wasn't relief. It was weight shifting, like something that lived on my back finally stepped down. I wasn't there to win. I wasn't there to be understood. I was there to stop pretending. All my life, I let her talk over me, smile through me, rewrite things I hadn't even said. I was never angry because she won, I said aloud in the car. I was angry because I let her. Back at home, I pulled off the bracelet Dad gave me when I graduated. The metal felt colder than I remembered. I didn't need proof of love anymore. I knew what I was made of. And it was more than memory. Later that afternoon, I opened the old wooden box I kept in the back of the closet, labeled in Sharpie, Thanksgiving 2014. Inside, photos, ticket stubs, Dad's handwriting on a napkin. One picture stopped me. Me, Dad, Merelda on the porch. She'd torn it in half years ago during some screaming match. I'd taped it back together like that would fix anything. I stared at it now, then dropped it into the sink and struck a match. The flame curled the photo inward, like it couldn't wait to forget. Not out of rage, just done. Dad's voice echoed back, something he once told me when I couldn't stand up to a professor. Real strength is when you speak, even when your voice shakes. I sat back down, replayed the USB one more time, not to find anything new, just to remind myself what lit the fire in the first place. The next morning, I walked to the nearest courier drop, manila envelope in hand, printed documents inside, labeled for the probate court. I sealed it, pressed it into the box, and whispered to no one. She warned me I'd regret going against her. Let's find out who regrets what. That night, after dinner, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. Merelda's voice, calm, controlled. "You're going to wish you stayed quiet." Then, click. Just a faint, mechanical sound. Not a word, but it hit harder than any insult she'd thrown. I pulled into my driveway just as the last sliver of sunlight bled beyond the horizon. The envelope and all its documents, Dad's letter, power of attorney papers, that bruised bronze key, pressed coldly in my bag. My phone buzzed a warning I didn't answer. Not yet. I braced myself for what I already knew would come. Inside, the house was dark. No lights in the hallway, no smell of dinner. Just the hollow echo of Merelda's mansion still dancing in my head. I dropped the bag by the door, but my eyes didn't leave the furniture, the perfect untouched space where noise never belonged. My mother sat in the living room, as though she'd been waiting. Her hands folded, face smooth, but her eyes were cold. I set the documents on the coffee table and looked up. "Why didn't you stop her?" Mom's voice was steady. "I saw the forgeries," she said. I blinked, confusion burning. "You knew?" I asked. But it wasn't a question. I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. She nodded. She talked about Merelda asking her to sign a document, how she didn't realize it was forged, and how she stayed quiet. Fear of dialogues turned into fear of ruining what little peace remained, fear of losing people, fear that if she spoke, she'd lose more than respect, she'd lose the narrative. I felt something deeper than betrayal. I felt hollowed out inside. My anger tasted like betrayal. I pressed her. "So you chose Merelda's image over Dad's truth." The silence hung, heavy. Suddenly the phone rang. Merelda's name showed up. I didn't want her, I didn't, but Mom handed me the phone. She came in, storming. Her presence was sharp and cold. She said, "You never asked, you never tried, always the victim." She crossed her arms, chest tight like armor. I didn't back down. I laid out the proof. The letters, bank notices, emails she ignored. All moments she refused to see me. She said I was making scenes, being dramatic, looking for validation. Then, "You were always the charity daughter." She said it loud enough I'm sure the neighbors heard. I felt a pulse of shame, then furious clarity. I replied, voice firm, "If being ignored is charity, then let me be its loudest critic." Mom broke. Tears came fast. Apologies tumbling out imperfect. "I thought silence was protecting you," she said. "But protection is not erasure, and silence is not strength." I felt all the memories, her not answering my calls, her smiling at Merelda's triumphs like they were her own. Dad once said, "What's the point of being safe if you never speak your truth?" I remembered that as I picked up the bracelet he gave me at graduation, cold against my wrist. I slipped it off. Didn't need proof of love. All I needed was courage. Night crept in through my window as I packed copies of every piece of evidence, letter, documents, USB, receipts. I texted Ray. "Tomorrow, I file." My hands shook a little, not from fear, but from finally feeling aligned. I stood by my bedroom window, looking toward Merelda's mansion across town, its lights on like a sneer. I whispered to myself, if she thought I'd stay invisible, she'll see me roaring. The morning air hit sharper than usual. I could hear my breath echoing inside the parked car as I stared at the courthouse entrance. The folder on the passenger seat sat like it had weight beyond its paper. Dad's words, timestamps, scans, everything. I grabbed it and stepped out. Each stair creaked under my shoes like an announcement. I wasn't here to hope. I was here to speak. Inside, the courtroom was a mix of wood polish and whispers. Faces I hadn't seen in years filled the gallery. Some looked away. Some looked too closely. Merelda sat with her legs crossed at the front, like she'd just come from a golf brunch. Delroy beside her, flipping through notes with the cool calm of someone who thought they'd cleaned their fingerprints. The judge entered. The clerk called the case. I stood when my name echoed through the speakers. For a second, I heard Dad in my mind. Justice remembers even when the world forgets. I let that be my spine. I laid the evidence on the table, slide by slide, the unsigned draft, the altered power of attorney. I laid out Dad's signature from 3 years ago, then the one on Merelda's document. The curve of the J told the story itself. Delroy shifted in his seat. I watched his hands clench under the table. My attorney, calm as granite, let me lead. I read Dad's letter, just enough of it to pierce through the noise, and matched it to the contradictions in the new version of his wishes. The judge leaned forward, asking for clarification on the date the documents were updated. We showed the metadata, timestamps, edits logged through Delroy's system. The courtroom shifted. Whispers now turned into murmurs. Merelda's face began to crack at the edges. She stood up, chest rising, nostrils flaring, but her voice shook. These were administrative clarifications. There was no bad intent, no fraud. She looked around for sympathy like it had been promised. She's twisting this. She's always been the dramatic one. I stood. The dramatic one has receipts, I said. I held up the notarized copy, the letter from Dad's estate lawyer, and a printed transcript of Delroy's internal memo that showed metadata editing outside authorized sessions. I looked directly at the judge. Is truth optional in betrayal? Because if it is, I need to know where the line really is. I looked across the room. My mother was there, quiet, tear-streaked, caught in her own battle. I didn't hate her. I didn't even feel disappointment anymore, just distance. And I knew in that moment I wasn't fighting to win something back. I was fighting because I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't let people rewrite the past just because they had louder voices and fancier chairs. Dad used to say, "Protect what you believe, even if no one is watching." So I did. I stopped trying to convince anyone who had already decided I was wrong, and I just laid out the truth, not for revenge. But to set the record, the judge called for a recess to review all materials. My fingers tingled. My legs ached from standing, but I gathered the folders quietly and stepped outside. Merelda followed. Not physically, but I could feel her watching me through the glass doors. She didn't look smug anymore. She looked rattled, and that told me everything I needed to know. They say the truth comes out in daylight, but when it does, everyone sees the scars. The hallway outside the courtroom felt colder after a recess like that. I sat on a bench that creaked under the weight of something heavier than my body. Years. I watched the second hand on the clock tick like it was judging me. I kept thinking about all the ignored emails I'd sent, the phone calls that ended too quickly, the times I was told to let it go. Funny how time feels different when you're finally this close to being heard. Mom sat beside me, still. Her hands folded, her gaze somewhere far beyond the beige wall. We hadn't said a word since the judge left. But the silence wasn't empty. It was crowded with everything we never said before. Across the room, Merelda paced, whispering fiercely to her lawyer. She looked angry, but underneath that was something new, maybe fear, or maybe the cracks finally showing. The bailiff opened the doors. "Court is back in session." I stood up slowly, grabbed my folder again, and whispered. He asked for dignity. "All I want is the truth to echo that." The judge re-entered, calm, composed. He adjusted his glasses, glanced briefly at each of us, and began. After review of all submitted materials, this court finds sufficient evidence of document tampering related to the estate of Richard James Holloway. Merelda shifted in her chair. Her mouth tightened. Delroy was stiff as a mannequin. Further, this court acknowledges multiple unauthorized financial transfers from estate accounts to external private holdings, actions inconsistent with the decedent's original intent. My heart didn't race. It just sat still, like it was waiting for something it already knew. "Merelda Holloway," the judge said, "you are ordered to stand." Her lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, I request to invoke the Joint Family Clause under Article 19.3 of the will." The room went silent. Even I froze. "Joint what?" The judge blinked, then nodded. "It is indeed within the will." I looked to my attorney. He looked just as surprised. The judge read from a sealed envelope. "In the event of legal disputes among heirs, assets and directives within this will shall be paused for a period of 18 months, unless both named parties agree in writing to proceed." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The clause wasn't in the version I had. Merelda smirked, almost proud. Dad had built in a forced reconciliation clause. I felt my teeth clench. Of all things. Silence. Again. Merelda muttered, loud enough for us to hear. "Manipulation from the grave." I didn't rise in anger. I rose because I had to stand for what came next. "This wasn't about peace," I said clearly. "It was about power hiding behind love." The judge didn't respond to that. But I could tell. He understood. He cleared his throat. Despite the clause, this court finds sufficient cause to restore the original documents. All altered paperwork is nullified. However, the clause applies. Distribution is frozen for 18 months. Merelda was fined, her conduct placed under review, but she walked out without cuffs. I walked out too. No handcuffs, no parade, no victory speech, just steps. I held the file like it was both proof and weight. Justice doesn't always hug you after. Sometimes it just hands you the truth and walks away. Outside, reporters swarmed, microphones raised. I didn't stop. Mom reached for my hand, tentative, unsure. This time, I let her hold it. We kept walking. At the sidewalk, I turned, looked back at the courthouse, not to remember it, but to mark the moment. "Dad," I whispered, "we're not done yet." But I heard you. The house was still, a kind of quiet I hadn't known in years. Not hollow, not heavy, just still. Morning light pushed through the blinds in soft lines across the kitchen table. The coffee maker hummed. I stood in the doorway, watching the pot fill, steam curling like breath from a tired soul. Peace doesn't announce itself. It just doesn't scream anymore. Mom had moved back in temporarily. She stayed in the guest room, left notes instead of giving advice. Sometimes she'd hum while folding towels. It didn't fix anything, but it didn't cut either. The court stuff? Done, on paper. But the accounts were still frozen. The house, still stuck in legal limbo. Most mornings, I'd pass by the hallway where Dad used to walk with his cup, humming out-of-tune hymns. Now, it was just me, and the echo of old floorboards. On the side table sat the envelope, the one I hadn't dared to open since the verdict. I'd kept it tucked behind the books, not forgotten, just postponed. I picked it up. The flap gave easily. Inside, a folded piece of paper, creased at the corners, Dad's handwriting thick and slanted. It was dated 3 weeks before he passed. "My girls," it began. "If you're reading this, something has cracked." He admitted to knowing more than he let on, that Merelda had shown signs of control, of hiding things. He hoped it wouldn't turn legal, that we'd talk it through, learn to walk the hard path together. He wrote about the clause, said he wanted peace, not punishment. That silence wasn't a weapon, but sometimes a delay to let love breathe again. Then, "I trusted you'd hold truth with both hands, not for revenge, but for restoration." At the bottom, a final line in smaller script. "If this is being read, then you've done the hard part. Now do the right part." I didn't cry, but I closed my eyes for a long time. He tried, not perfectly, but he tried. The next few days, I started sorting his boxes. Not to erase anything, just to give everything its place. I set aside a portion of my future inheritance, whenever it came, for a trust. Not for Merelda, for her daughter. That was the line I could draw. A boundary, not a bridge. I called Merelda once, no argument, no big conversation. She answered, said nothing, then hung up. And honestly, that silence, I could live with that. Closure isn't a locked door, it's deciding to leave the hallway. I wrote a letter to myself, for the woman I might be 15 years from now, sealed it, placed it beside Dad's. Life didn't flip into joy after that, it just softened. I picked up part-time hours again, nothing fancy, just enough to feel like I was part of something. I pulled out my old easel and started painting again on weekends. Didn't care if it was good. Mom planted tomatoes. I don't think she even liked tomatoes, but she liked watching things grow. I joined a support group, adult kids who'd survived estate wars. It was strange, how comforting it felt to hear someone else say, "Yeah, I got cut out of the will because I asked questions." The legal notice came, 14 months left on the clause. I read it once, then slid it into the drawer. I didn't mark a calendar, didn't plan around it. Instead, I started sketching floor plans for a smaller home. Not a mansion, something I could clean in one day, something with no ghost of a hallway argument. On a mild Sunday morning, I walked out to Dad's favorite bench. The wood creaked the same way it used to when he sat there reading the paper. I reread his letter, folded it again, tucked it back inside the envelope. "I kept it with both hands, Dad," I whispered. I hope that was enough. A soft breeze passed by, lifted a single leaf beside me, let it fall again. I didn't get all the answers, but I'm finally asking better questions.